A slice of the community is made possible by the support of the First Horizon Foundation.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Slice of the Community. I'm your host, Jerome Moore, and today we're live in studio, joined by an amazing, beautiful audience with anti-racist author and educator Tim Wise. Tim, glad to have you here.
Good to be here. Good to be here.
Nashvilleians talking to each other.
Yes,
Nashville
indeed.
natives. We don't get this often.
We're the only ones in the room, possibly. I don't know about these other folks.
Maybe. We unicorns, they say.
That's it. That's it.
And so I want to get straight into it, especially talking about Nashville.
Right.
We had some peculiar recent events that just happened in our beautiful downtown Broadway.
Well, there's always peculiar events going on Broadway, but I know what you're talking about.
Right, and
yes,
so,
yes.
On this given weekend, a group of neo-Nazis decided, hey, this is going to be a great place and comfortable setting for us to put on display that we are here overtly, but also covertly because some of them had on masks. What was your take on that, being from Nashville, that happening right here in our own city? And leading up to this, right, knowing we was going to dive into just the whole democracy of Tennessee, how did you take that act of demonstration in 4K by those neo-Nazis?
Well, I mean, it's terrifying on the one. Well, a couple thoughts. I mean, number one, as I joke with you, look, I think ridicule is a very important weapon against people that are fools. And so if you have the head of a Nazi organization who dresses like the maitre d' at the worst steakhouse in town, he had like a red jacket, like he thought he was really stylish, and he just looks like a fool with his tattoo on the side of his head. Like at some point, you do have to make fun of these fools, but at the same time understand what the threat that they represent, right? And the fact that they felt comfortable says a lot. The fact that think about where they didn't go.
Right.
We were talking about this in the back.
Yeah, they didn't go to North Nashville.
They didn't go to Jefferson Street to do that.
They didn't go on Buchanan.
They absolutely did not. They didn't go to Midtown Atlanta. They didn't go to New Orleans. They came to a place that they thought, rightly or wrongly, that their message would be acceptable. And then we as Nashvilleians have to ask, why is that? Why is it that neo-Nazis, why is it that white supremacists would think that this was a town where they were welcome? Because if we think that's not us, then that's our job to prove that that's not us.
Exactly.
It's not enough to say this is not who we are. Because look, I'm from here. The idea this isn't who we are, I told you in the back, the very first, and folks in the audience ought to go and look this up, the first issue of the Nashville Scene, which is our alternative weekly, first issue, or at least one of the first, I think it was the first in 1989, cover story was about a neo-Nazi skinhead that was organizing white supremacists in this town. In 1981, a group of neo-Nazis and Klansmen tried to blow up the temple that I attended for Hebrew school as a child. Only reason they didn't succeed was because there was an FBI informant that was embedded with them, and they foiled the plot. So in 1958, a neo-Nazi from Atlanta, J.B. Stoner, was involved in the bombing of the Jewish Community Center on West End. 1957, Klansmen and neo-Nazis were involved in the bombing of Hattie Cotton Elementary. So the idea that this is new, the idea that this is not Nashville, because we like to pride ourselves on being a town, sort of like Atlanta was, they used to call themselves the town that was, too busy to hate or whatever, and we used to call ourselves, and we still do, this enlightened mecca we got a Parthenon, for God's sake, right? We got the Athens of the South, we got a Parthenon, man, So we think that we are somehow above it, because, we're not Birmingham. We didn't have bombs being set off every weekend during the Civil Rights Movement. But we had stuff happening all along that was ugly. And the idea that those guys on Lower Broad, or wherever it was that, marching through downtown, are new, it's not really new. It is an escalation, but it's not unique. And we need to ask ourselves as Nashvilleians what we're going to do to make sure that people realize they're not welcome here. Because nobody did that. We're watching the videos, and there's one guy yelling at him, and a bunch of tourists are just looking at him like, it's fascinating, let me get another drink and listen to some more music. Nazis should be uncomfortable on the streets. Our grandparents knew what to do with Nazis. But apparently we only dealt with foreign Nazis. Local Nazis were like, it's different. It's not.
Well, that brings into I think the question when we talk about privilege, right? And the comfortability of it and giving that up, right? I think some people maybe seen that and said, I could say something, but let me just stay in my comfort zone. What do you say, especially I think in particular to white folks, who is your message is usually too when you're talking about privilege? And I want to preface this too. As a person that lived abroad, as an American, I knew I had privilege outside the United States. So I know it's different levels of privilege, but just specifically speaking when it comes to racial privilege. what strategies do you usually give folks to wrestle with that and figure out, like, what does that mean to give that up? What does that mean to jeopardize it? What does that mean to be uncomfortable and give up that comfort of their own privilege?
I mean, there's no silver bullet strategy that you can give anybody for that, because we all have some kind of privilege.
Right.
You were talking about when you were abroad, right? We all have, and it might be racial privilege, it might be gender privilege, it might be class privilege, it might be able-bodied privilege, and really all privilege, all we're saying when we say that, because people get very uncomfortable, as you know.
Precisely.
And white folks in particular, I've been white a long time, 55 years. I know my people
a lot of
very
whiteness.
well. It's a lot of whiteness, a lot of years of whiteness. I know the handshake. You might not know we have a handshake. I'll show it to you after.
You had to show me in the back.
We got a handshake, I guarantee you. We got to look. We do all that.
Yeah.
We don't nod at the airport,
okay.
but we do say things. And so what we do is we get very uncomfortable, because you say about privilege and everybody's, well, but everybody is suddenly a coal miner's daughter when somebody mentions privilege. We're all Sissy Spacek in that movie. We're all raised in the hills and hollers of Eastern Kentucky. No, we weren't.
We all struggled.
And everybody struggles.
Right.
I don't know anybody, I know very few people, I should say, that haven't struggled. But the issue of privilege is relative, right? And so you might not have economic privilege. I certainly did not. But you might have racial privilege, or you might have able-bodied privilege, or you may have privilege as a Christian in a mostly Christian community or environment, right? Privilege is just about having the ability to not think about some stuff, right? To be oblivious to other people's reality. And if you have the luxury of being oblivious to other people's reality, that's one less thing you got to worry about.
Right.
When you're looking for a job, you're not worried about how you're going to be viewed as either capable or incapable. When you're interacting with law enforcement, you're not going to think about the way that you're being viewed as opposed to somebody else. So it isn't meant as a critique of your character. And I think for white folks standing up to people like that we're just demonstrating in our town, if you really want to say you're different than them, then you have to relinquish the privilege of your silence, right? That's the biggest privilege, the privilege of being silent, the privilege of saying, well, I'm not like that. Yeah. I think about this town, and we were talking in the green room about this. Nashville is one of arguably, maybe inarguably, one of the three most important cities in the civil rights struggle.
Fact.
It is not credited with that. We think about Birmingham, we think about Selma, we think about certain places, but Nashville really, even though Greensboro sit-ins were first, 2 weeks later they hit here, and really the sit-in movement really begins in earnest. And you have some of the most important civil rights leaders coming out of this town who were students at schools here being taught by James Lawson in nonviolent techniques and tactics. And if you're thinking about the 60s, I remember thinking about my own family. My grandmother, my mom's mom, was never going to be one of those white folks that yelled at black children going to a white school. She would never have done that. That would have been tacky.
Yeah.
Right? That would have been trashy. We don't do that.
Yeah.
But I know my grandmother. God bless her and God rest her soul. I know that she also just didn't understand what all the fuss was about. That would have been her way of saying it. She used to complain. I remember hearing the story. She couldn't go down to Harvey's or whatever it was to shop. Yeah. Because there might be violence. Those black folks. The black folks weren't going to start anything. The only people starting violence were the white folks that were dumping shakes on their heads and putting cigarettes out on the necks. But she was just so convinced, like, this has ruined my weekend. So was she a racist? Well, in the sense of that infamous photo from Little Rock where Elizabeth Eckford is getting yelled at by the white woman who's behind her as white girl as she tries to go into school at Little Rock Central. She wasn't that kind of racist. But she was the kind that took her privilege to just be oblivious and ran with it. Yeah. And by saying that, I'm not trying to disrespect her memory. What I'm saying is I think a lot of white folks in the 60s were like that. Yeah. They weren't going to be I'm going to throw a rock at your head, I'm going to throw a brick through your window, I'm going to bomb your school kind of racist, but they were just the kind that were like, why can't we all just let it be?
Well, I think what you're saying, and some of the things that I tend to echo, is like silence usually benefits the oppressor and not the oppressed.
Always.
Right?
Always.
And so you can't be neutral in these things, right?
Yes.
You can't be lukewarm in these things, right? And I want to dig in, because I know this little tad bit about you. I don't know if everybody else does, but I want you to really share that story with us, that how your mom really encouraged you or really made you embrace diversity here in Nashville, and how that really played a role in who you are today.
right? Well, I think my mom, who was raised by the mother that I just disrespected, again, God rest her soul, lovely woman in a million ways, but flawed like we all are, right? My mom, who passed almost a year ago, it'll be a year on the 12th of March, made some decisions for me. You know, I was born in 1968. I was born here in Nashville, and went to public school from 74 to 86 here, but I went to preschool at TSU. And my mom made the decision to put me in the preschool program, the early childhood ed program at Tennessee State, for a couple of reasons. Number one was because she knew I was going to be in fully desegregated schools, which she had never experienced when she went to school in Nashville. You know, we started busing in 71, but it didn't really filter down to all levels till about 74. That's the year that I start. So in some ways, we were either one of the first or the first fully desegregated class. And my mom wanted me to have some context for not being always the norm in the room, right? Wanted me to be in a place where I wasn't always the normal one, quote unquote, the majority. Right. So she put me at TSU, where I was one of 3 kids that weren't black. And the program was run by black women. And it was in North Nashville. That program is still in the same building, same floor, same part of the campus that it was in 1972, 73. I was at TSU, you know, at glory days of, I mean, Ed Jones was playing football. Joe Gillum had just finished playing football there. It was an amazing time to be on that campus, even if you're only 4. You knew that, like, man, this team just won what they used to call the Black College Championship. They just won it in 1973. And my mom did it, A, because she wanted me to have some experience, but also, to be honest, to probably make her parents angry. So, whatever. There's a different way I would say that if we weren't on TV.
Right,
but,
yeah,
know,
yeah,
she's trying to do something to them, make them feel some kind of way about what she was doing. And, but whatever her motivations were, right, the fact is it was instrumental, because what it meant was that 2 things were going to happen. One is that my peer group was going to be mostly black kids. And I realized, like, all white people will say that we have black friends, and we're usually lying. I didn't have anything but black friends for like the first couple of years. That was just my peer group. Right. And so that was important, because when I got to 1st grade and 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and that's who I'm hanging out with, and I'm seeing that they're being treated differently. Yeah. They're being punished. We're all acting fools because we're all 6. Yeah. That's what 6-year-olds do. Yeah. But if you're black acting a fool, you're going to get sent to the office. Right. And if you're white acting a fool, you're not.
Well, we still have that disparity in the discipline today.
Absolutely, still happens. Yep. Nothing has changed in that regard. In fact, nationwide, you know, black students are 2.5 times more likely to be suspended, 3 times more likely to be expelled. Right. Even in kindergarten, who expels a kindergartner? Yeah. A kindergartner is 4. Yeah. A 4-year-old acted up and you're shocked? Yeah. Like you need to learn how to deal with a 4-year-old and 5-year-old, not expel them. Right. But that's what they did then, it's what they do now. But because that was my peer group, right, I was able to see it, and those were my friends. So if you're taking my friends out of the room and you're punishing them, I'm going to notice it. Meanwhile, the other white kids, though, who didn't go to TSU, who didn't have a context of black friendships, were probably not even noticing it all. Like, why would they? Like, oh, the black kids are over there learning different material. We're over here. Well, that's just how it is. But for me, it was like, that's not how it was last year in North Nashville, right? It wasn't what I'm used to. And the second thing was that it meant that I was being subordinated to black authority figures, mostly black women, right? So I was learning, the first people that I learned to respect their authority after my own parents, whose authority I often questioned, and legitimacy. But the only people I learned to respect after them were black women. That's who ran the program. So if I have black women at the age of 4, 5 years old telling me what's up, and my parent, you know, what your parents send you to school, they're like, hey, mind your teachers, do it, you know. Right. I'm learning to respect black wisdom, and black women's wisdom in particular, in 1973, which is, I don't think most white children most white adults learn to respect black women's wisdom in 2024, let alone 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds in 1972, 73. So it was a great gift, because what that meant was 20-something years later, when I was doing community organizing in New Orleans, I'd gone to college down there. I continued to do activism down there, and I was organizing. And the people that I worked with in the community were mostly women of color, mostly black women telling me what's up. And I'm not going to be the white guy who, when they're telling me, I'm going to be like, are you sure? Like, you might be hallucinating, right? Your reality can't really be that tough. I'm sure you're exaggerating. No, I'm going back to that 4-year-old that's like, okay, you tell me that's the deal, right?
How do you get white men that are in those situations, in those spaces where our people of color, to learn how to take a backseat, learn how to be an active listener,
Yeah.
and not present their white male privilege or just their whiteness so overtly where they're really causing more harm, and they might have good intentions, but they just don't know how to take that step back.
Right. It's hard because I think the gift for me was that it happened so early, right? That I learned it early. I think it would have been a lot harder. Like if I had never had that experience and I had gone to New Orleans for college, which is a black city in every way. It's black demographically, culturally, historically. You can't appreciate that city unless you appreciate blackness and the history of black folks in this country. But if I had not learned that early and had just, I knew some kids that went to Tulane, which is where I went, who came from like the North Shore of Chicago, came from Long Island, came from, like really affluent parts of New York City. And their interaction with black folks had been minimal, absolutely minimal. And they got down there and they went crazy. Like they didn't appreciate the city. They didn't respect the city. They didn't respect the people of the city. And so I think it is harder. But for me, what I try to get people to think about is to move away from, I don't want white men or white people generally to feel guilty about the stuff they don't know. Right? Because if you don't know stuff, you just don't know stuff. Like I don't know chemistry. I don't know calculus. You know why? Because the Metro Nashville Public Schools in their infinite wisdom did not require me to learn that. They were like, you got to take 3 years of math. I said, good, I'm gonna take Algebra 1 over again. Because I don't think I got it right the first time. And then I'm gonna take geometry, I'm gonna take Algebra 2. I'm not even gonna do trig, y'all. Like I'm out. I'm gonna do Algebra 2 and I'm done. And they said 2 years of science. I'm like, good. Basic physical science and biology. And I'm out. And so my thing was, if you don't ask me to learn something, I'm not going to know how to do it. It doesn't. I don't have to feel shame about it. I don't feel any shame. Now, if I was an engineer, y'all be wondering, like,
how you
he does not know calculus. I do not need to drive on a bridge that he helped to figure out. But like, but when it comes to things like white privilege or racism in America, I don't expect white people to know anything. Because why would we? First off, even before all this recent nonsense about banning the teaching of accurate history, even before we start yanking books off the shelves, we weren't teaching this right before that. We weren't teaching that. I grew up, I went to school in these schools. I graduated in 1986, and we never, ever learned about the history of the Nashville movement. We would take field trips to Andrew Jackson's house, right? The War Memorial Building, the state capitol, and some tea house down across from TPAC called the Satsuma Tea Room. Look it up, Google it. And we went to the Satsuma Tea Room because two little old white ladies from Franklin were the first female business owners in downtown Nashville. I mean, I guess that's cool, but like 500 steps around the corner is where the sit-ins happen. Maybe we could spend a minute talking about that, but we didn't. So why in the world would I be shocked in this town or anywhere else that white folks don't know the history they weren't taught? So the key is not to shame people for it. Right? The key is not to make them feel bad for not knowing it. I want white folks to be angry about the truth that we were not told. Because you know what we weren't told? It's not just that we weren't told the history of anti-black racism or racism generally. We also weren't taught the history of white allyship and solidarity.
What is that? What allyship is a buzzword, right? What does that mean? What does it mean to be an ally? From your perspective, from just your education?
I think it means to follow the leadership of people of color, particularly black folk, when it comes to fighting institutionalized racism and inequality. So if you look at the history of the civil rights struggle, there were always, look at the abolition struggle, there were always white folks, but they always took their marching orders, so to speak, from black and brown folks. Always. John Brown didn't just do what he did on his own. John Brown was in conversation with Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and all the people in that history. Bob Zellner, Dottie Zellner, all the people in the civil rights struggle, the people here in this town. There were white folks who were instrumental, not only in Nashville, but around the country, in being involved always in SNCC and other organizations following the leadership of and the direction of black and brown peoples. And so to me, to be a real ally, to be in real solidarity with an anti-racism cause is to be able to subordinate your own ego to the larger purpose. And it's hard because we live in a society, first of all, that does not encourage humility in general, particularly in this age when anybody can get their stuff noticed on social media with like, oh, I got something to say. You know, and I can get my stuff out there in 20 seconds. And so my ego is telling me, I want to be heard. I want to be seen. I want to influence
get those
people.
Likes.
Right. I want to get those likes. I want to get that dopamine hit. So that makes it really easy for people not to sort of follow, right? It's like, I got to be the first to say it, instead of saying like, actually, I need to listen to what folks are saying and what they're asking me to do.
Right.
And I wouldn't have known any of that if I hadn't been trained by black folks who were community organizers, the ones that trained me in New Orleans, who were like, that's what your role is. And we want you to play your role. You have a role to play, but part of it is learning the history of white solidarity. Because I knew some of the names, but I didn't know all the history, because we don't talk about that. Right. All you learn in school about white folks that fought against racism. So think about the white people you do learn about, if you learn about any of them. John Brown, all right, but they killed him.
Right.
You learn about Viola Liuzzo, Selma to Montgomery March, well, they shot her. Right. You learn about Goodman and Schwerner, who were killed along with James Chaney in Mississippi in 1964. They murdered them. James Reeb killed him. Right. So if the only white folks that you learn about are white people who stood up and then they killed them, you can imagine, like, it's hard to inspire young white people. And in fact, I would be worried about you if you were like, cool, I'm going to do that. Because then you want to be a martyr, and then I don't really want to mess with you anyway.
Right.
So at some point, you got to talk about the white folks that stood up and they didn't die for standing up. Like, they still are doing it.
Right.
You know, like Mickey Schwerner's widow, Rita, continued to do work in Seattle as a civil rights attorney, as an activist and an advocate for, I mean, I think she still is. I don't know, I haven't kept up with her, but I mean, she was doing it for 30 or 40 years after he was murdered in Philadelphia, Mississippi. So we need to learn those stories. And I feel like if we would learn them, some of that guilt that comes when white folks learn the truth about the history could dissipate, right? Because we would realize, okay, we have a fork in the road. We can choose one of two paths. Silence, which is complicity.
Right, benefits the oppressor,
right,
for sure.
Or resistance. And even though the resistance will be messy and you'll make lots of mistakes, it's still a road that you can choose, but I don't even know I can choose it if you don't teach it to me.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't show me that path, all I see is the one road. I see two roads.
Yeah.
There's three roads, right? One is active participation in evil.
Right.
But all the nice white liberals will never do that.
Never.
You know,
Of
because
course
they don't believe in that.
Yeah, especially not here in
Because we're not
Nashville.
Nazis.
Yeah, right.
We're a nice town.
Exactly.
It's Nashville nice.
It's its city, you know?
That's, you know, we're nice people. We do nice things. We care about people.
Athens of the South.
So right, so we'll just forget that one path and we'll just say there's two paths. One is silence and the other is active resistance. And unfortunately, silence is easier, and especially if you have not been taught the option of the other one.
Easier and convenient.
Yeah.
When we think about Nashville, or just Tennessee in general, the future, right? Many people like to say, well, Nashville is a blue dot in a red state.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means, if that's a good thing, or compared to what, right?
Yeah.
Compared to what? How can we, regardless of the gender, regardless of the ethnicity, race, how can we be active participants in being anti-racist, but also getting at the root of systemic racism, whether it's in education or whether in law enforcement, and economic disparities too, that kind of coincides with the inequalities, right, of marginalized folks.
Right, well, I mean, we are, for what it's worth, I suppose, that blue dot in a red ocean. But again, are we just gonna be happy about that? Or are we just gonna sit around and be like, well, you know, we're not Hohenwald.
Right.
I mean, what? Okay,
Yeah.
you know, okay, we're not Franklin or whatever. And even Franklin's changing. I mean, even Franklin, you know, at least, I mean, you know, Franklin has probably more folks in it that are resisting now than there were 20 years ago. So that's good to see, I suppose. But like, what does it mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be that?
Yeah.
It's like I lived in New Orleans for 10 years. What does it mean to be New Orleans when folks out of New Orleans still run your state?
Yeah.
You know, and here in Tennessee, how is it that we can be, okay, so we're this big blue dot and we don't have a representative.
Yeah.
We don't have a rep. The rep lives in, well, wherever he lives, whichever one y'all got. You got one of three. One of them lives in Columbia. One of them lives in Cookeville. And one of them lives in Clarksville or whatever, right? Like, they don't even have to come here.
Right.
So how is it that, so we better get off that kick about being proud about how progressive we are when we don't have any power.
Yeah.
You know, and so we better figure out the power that we do have.
Exactly.
Because it's not going to be, at least for now, it's not going to be at the policymaking level. But it's going to be at the hell-raising level, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be at the level of refusing to bend to the whims of a state legislature that hates us, that absolutely hates us. And every white person in the state, in the city of Nashville, who consider themselves progressive, better understand why they hate us.
Yeah.
See, this is why it's important to have a racial analysis for this.
Yeah.
There's a reason Memphis and Nashville are hated.
Yeah.
And it isn't just because we're blue dots, you see. We know why Memphis is hated. That doesn't even take a second of thought.
Right.
But Nashville is hated too because we're just too diverse.
Right.
We're too cosmopolitan, and these folks that run the state don't believe in cosmopolitanism, you know? And so we have to, I think we need to be spreading a message that says that to everybody in this town, if you care about economic justice, if you care about educational justice, healthcare justice, any of those things, you got to understand why these people are, when they're coming for black folks and brown folks and immigrants and and LGBTQ folks, they're coming for all of you. Every last one. They don't love any of y'all until you move to their town.
Right.
They love their grain silos more than they love you.
Well, look, hey, y'all give it up for Tim. This has been amazing, Tim. That was strong. Hope y'all got y'all questions ready. And people watching at home, I just want to thank you for tuning in to this very first live in studio with an audience of a slice of the community. If you would like to continue this conversation with Tim and ask him questions, please go to our YouTube channel by searching Nashville Public Television in the YouTube search box. And again, I thank y'all and appreciate y'all again. Give it up one more time for Tim. Questions from online. That live here every day.
Right.
What is your take on that, and how is that even probably rooted in systemic racism practices that has been continuing and going on here, just not in Nashville, but just Tennessee as a state?
Well, on the one hand, look, I mean, there are things about the new Nashville that I love and things about it that I hate.
Okay.
Just like there are things about the old Nashville that I loved and things about it that I hated. It's not like the old Nashville wasn't systemically racist and we just became that.
Right.
And it's not like the new Nashville is suddenly fantastic and we weren't fantastic before. There were always great things about this town. But the problem is, just like any other place in America, we are rooted in a society that has always functioned principally for the needs of the haves versus the have-nots, and that is played out both economically and racially, and a combination of those two. And so when you become the it city, when you become a city people want to go to, the developers are looking to cater to certain types of people. The local officials are looking to cater to certain types of people. So we're going to cut sweetheart deals for sports teams. We're not going to do that for working class and lower income folks. At the same time, I don't know anybody living in a poor community that wants the community to stay poor. Right. So the problem with gentrification is not that the neighborhood gets more affluent or more money. The question is, why do y'all just put the money in there when certain people discover our neighborhood?
Right.
Right? Why is it? Because I mean, I grew up at a time when that thing we call 12 South, that was just Granny White.
Yeah.
That was just between 8th and 12th. And like 70% of the people who lived there that I went to school with were black.
Yeah.
And now it is, $750,000 houses, $1 million houses, overwhelmingly white. They reopened the school over there, which they had closed for years because you had all these white families like, we need a school for our little babies.
Let's open it up.
Well, black folk needed a school, but y'all didn't want a school then. So that's the price. It's not that gentrification is a weird word because the actual increasing affluence or capital in a neighborhood, everybody wants that.
Right.
But why does it only come when certain people arrive?
Right.
And so can we figure out a way? I think this is the challenge for Nashville and every other city like us. How do we figure out how to benefit development in a way that protects both the financial interests of people that have been in the neighborhood for a minute? So if you're on fixed income and you've been in, it could be 12 South, it could be East Nashville, it could be any neighborhood that's gentrifying, and you've been there for 20 years, and you're a homeowner, but now you can't pay the property taxes because the values have skyrocketed because all these affluent folks who used to flee the city came back.
Right.
Their parents fled, now y'all came back, brought your money with you, and now I can't afford to live here, so where do I move? Or if I'm renting, and now the rents go up, now I can't afford to rent. So there's got to be some kind of policy that we can think about that would say, look, if you've been in a neighborhood for a minute before it got hip, before it got to be the place to be, we're going to freeze your rent. Or we're going to freeze your property taxes at a level that only goes up for like the rate of inflation maybe, right? As opposed to going up 10% or 30% or whatever it is. Now, if you're a newcomer, you should be the one to bear the cost of gentrification. Right? If you just moved in, you bear the extra cost on property taxes. You bear the higher rent. Because that way you'd still have some transition, but it wouldn't be this rapid transition where the neighborhood totally flips and changes culturally and in every other way. I think Nashville still has, and this may not be the case, but several years ago, Nashville, I think our zoning rules, for instance, say that for every unit that's built of like apartment or condo space, and you see them going up everywhere, right? We have more cranes, I think, than any metropolitan area in the United States, building condos and apartments. For every unit, you have to have 2 parking spaces. Now, I want you to think about what that means, right? If for every unit, you got to have 2 parking spaces, not only does that encourage everybody to have a car, which congests the traffic, and we all know we just got rated the worst commute in the United States, which is saying a lot, because you still got Atlanta and Dallas and Houston, and we're like, no, forget y'all. Like, we're way worse than y'all. But when you have two parking spots for every unit, that means you got to build garages, you got to build parking lots, and that means that's less space for people to live in. So when you have less space for people to live, what happens? The rent for everybody else goes up. Right? And so it makes it impossible for working class people to live in the city. Now they got to move 35 minutes out, 40 minutes out, come into work. Right? We've seen this all over the country. You see it in major metropolitan areas out west. You've seen it for 20 years out there, and now we're starting to see it. So we've got to figure out a way to encourage development, but development that serves the least of us rather than just the most affluent and the newcomers. And that can be done, but it requires a certain degree of foresight and wisdom that I think sometimes we lack.
Megan, you got another question? Please, again, I don't see nobody come up to the mic. Don't be scared. You know, it's okay.
We can get this question and then we'll toss it over to our audience. But I have a question on YouTube, where we are live, from Intuitive Heart Healing Center. And this question's for you, Tim. Given Black women's key role in your upbringing, what are your thoughts on direct funding for them by Fund Black Women? It must be an organization, if you've heard of it.
Well, I think any opportunity that we have, whether it's that organization or any other, to figure out ways to steer capital and to steer resources to Black women leaders, whether that's business leaders, whether that's community organizers, nonprofit organizations led by Black women, educators who are Black women, I think we should take it. And I think that we ought to be investigating ways to not only that, we ought to be investigating ways to spend our money. I'm gonna say our money, I mean white folks' money. Figuring out how to spend our money with Black-owned businesses, seeding Black-run nonprofits, particularly nonprofits run by Black women, figuring out ways to redirect resources individually. Now, having said that, I think it's also important that we remember that Black women are not a charity, and Black folks are not a charity. So the idea that it's enough to steer our individual resources to Black folks misses the larger issue, which is until we have systemic reparation for the damage of white supremacy, we're not really doing anything. Right? Until we actually, I mean, the idea of like, because you will hear, I've heard plenty of white folks say like, I'm going to give this much money to this Black family down the road. Okay, that's cool, but that's a charity impulse. Solidarity means that we ask for an economy of scale, which says, here's the damage, we know how to calculate it, we need public policy that acknowledges the damage and pays reparation for that. That's what we rebuilt our enemies after World War II. Legit rebuilt our enemies, spent millions, billions of dollars to rebuild the people we had just been bombing. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars giving housing subsidy loans, subsidized housing loans to white families to build the middle class. That's what the FHA and VA loans were from the 30s to the early 60s. We did that, and 97% of those benefits went to white families. There would be no white middle class without government intervention. But we don't do that for black folks? How is that? Well, that is because we don't acknowledge this damage, or we think of it as individual damage. Right. So we ought to support and fund Black-led organizations. We ought to put our money in Black institutions, and we should be pushing for public policy that acknowledges the systemic harm, because the harm is not individual, it is systemic, and it can only be repaired that way.
Equity costs money.
Yeah, it does. It's not cheap. It's not cheap. Right.
Got a question right here.
Wagwan family, look, my name is Jafi, right? So I got two questions for you. And great job, by the way. I love that part when you said that we should honor black women because of their infinite wisdom. It's crazy that we need a white man to say that, right? Because I know some black brothers who don't even want to show their love for black women, and that's even crazier, right? Sure. And it don't matter who you love, real talk, you feel me? I just feel like if you black, you should love black women in general. Sure. But anyway, back to the question. First, I got two questions. The first question is, and it's a little bit of like a statement, like I feel like we have enough evidence that racism exists. Right. But when a situation like the neo-Nazis happens, it's almost like people are in shock. Yeah. How do we improve our approach to the response of racism in 2024 as individuals, as a state, and overall globally? The second question is, do black and brown people benefit from racism or slavery?
Well, I'll do the second part first, because it's the easier part. Yes,
that's not a tough question.
I will have to disagree with brother. Yeah, I will disagree with Brother DeSantis and his folks. I don't believe there are any benefits from enslavement or racism.
Really?
I know that's a controversial statement. Right. I know that was a hard one.
That's calculus.
Right. Yeah. The first part is trickier, because how do we improve our response or our reaction? I think number one is we improve it by not being shocked. Part of the problem, right, is that when we get shocked, and this happens every time. George Floyd happened, and that was everybody. No, not everybody. Black folks didn't say it. White folks said, "This isn't America." What the hell? This is America. That is an everyday thing. That wasn't shocking to. I don't know any black folks that were like, "Oh my God, they killed that man on the street." Yeah. But there were a lot of white folks like, I can't believe that happened. Now, on the one hand, look, if you're being shocked, we'll send you into the streets to protest. Okay, all right. But here we are, right, 3.5 years later, and folks apparently moved on, I guess. Some people have moved on. So stop being surprised. Look, the whole history of America is this history. Right. And which is why they don't want to teach it. Right.
It's rooted.
Because they don't want us to understand that. The reason that they want to pull these books off the shelves is because you had a lot of young white folks that were starting to follow the wisdom of black people and listen to, and it was like, we can't have that. We have to pull these books out, because if you know the history, you think about young people, children, right, have this innate sense of justice. Right. Children have an innate sense of what is fair and what is correct and what is right. It's only later when we get older that we wring all that out of us in the name of paying our mortgage and paying our bills and getting ahead of other people. Kids don't think about that. So you want to get people while they're young. Right. So part of the way we have to respond, look, the thing about them pulling these books out, there was a great article in either the New York Times or the Washington Post last week that was talking about black families that in the midst of this assault on real history have decided, listen, we're not going to wait around for y'all to teach it. Right. We're just going to teach it. Right. We're going to do it in our homes, in our churches, in our nonprofit organizations. We're going to do it on the weekends. Right. It'll be an extracurricular thing. We're going to teach our children what y'all don't want to teach them. White parents should be doing the same thing. There's nothing that says that white parents have to rely on what the K-12 schools feed their children. Right. I wouldn't have. Right. Thank God my parents didn't, because like I said, I wouldn't have learned any of the stuff that I knew from the schools I attended, but my parents taught me things. Yeah. So we have to take, it's a little bit of that. Like when you wait around for the schools, if you trust the educational system to be anti-racist, you haven't been paying attention.
What?
If you trust institutions to actually challenge racism and racial inequality, you haven't been paying attention.
Right.
So you have to do a lot of that on your own. A lot of that is that personal stuff we have to do in our own families. So I think that's part of the response we have to have.
We got a question online, Megan?
We do, and then we can toss it over to the audience questions in studio. The question is, didn't know about last week's neo-Nazi march until afterwards. They have a right to march. What should we have done?
Man, it's a hard one. I don't know what I could advocate without getting in trouble.
Yeah, there's many things that could have been done.
A lot of things could have been done. Well, look, here's the thing. I suppose it's fair to say they have a right to march. I suppose you have a right to stand in the middle of Central Park and yell racial slurs. But if you do that, it makes you a horrible human being. And the rest of us have the right to tell you that you're a horrible human being. So what we needed on Broadway when they were doing that was a lot more people calling them who they were. Yeah. And we had one guy. I don't know if y'all have seen the videos. I've seen one guy, and he was like Australian, I think. I don't know. I mean,
tell his accent. Yeah.
I think from his accent, he sounded Australian to me. I don't know for sure, but he definitely, he didn't sound like a local Nashvilleian. I needed to hear a local, maybe he was, but maybe it was Keith Urban. I don't know who it was. But, I don't know, Nicole Kidman might have been yelling at it. I don't know. But we need some people, I need some people that sound like they just came out of Tootsie's to yell at those guys. That's what I need. Now, I mean, I could argue that, some beer bottles could have been thrown, but I mean, I'm not advocating violence. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it could have happened. Yeah. And if it had happened, I wouldn't have shed a tear. Right. But no, I think we have to be as forceful. The fact that people have the freedom of speech, people sometimes I think react to that by saying that therefore we should somehow not shout people down. But my freedom of speech says I get to say whatever I want to you. Yeah. And if I'm down there when that happens, I need to have more than one guy yelling at guys they're marching with swastika flags. This isn't even like, are they Nazis? I don't know. Like even the local press was like put Nazis in quote marks. What's the quote mark? It's a swastika. Like what is the debate? They're not pretending to be, this is not cosplay. Yeah. This is not the Renaissance fair, right? This is these guys are straight up Nazis, and we're still acting like they're not, or they're idiots or whatever, and
they're staged. They're agents.
Well, they think they're federal agents, right? Of course.
Yeah.
And so part of it is we need more people. I need if you've got a group of people marching in your town yelling, "Deportation will save the nation," which is what they were yelling, or "There will be blood," which is that group's favorite line. There will be blood. Well, if there is, it's not all going to be ours. Yeah. Let's just say that. Yeah. That there might be, but it won't just be ours. Right. And I need somebody to be able to stand up and say, because like I said, our grandparents knew how to deal with Nazis, and I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. And we apparently forgot.
I wanted to ask you a question about DEI. It's a hot topic right now. I have a lot of conversations with people about it, and the people that get the most frustrated when I'm trying to explain the concept are white folks. So I guess it's a two-part question. Why do you think white folks get so upset about DEI? And the second part is, how would you, as a white person, explain the importance of something, of these programs like that?
So it's actually a really interesting question, and I have an easy answer for it. But it's the easy answer would be, well, they get upset about DEI because it challenges their position and their power, and that might be true for some people. But I think actually there's another answer, and I've actually worked as an expert witness on a couple of lawsuits. I'm working on one now where some disgruntled white person thinks they've been victimized by a DEI policy, and I'm being called in to explain why they're wrong, basically. And what I have learned in my 30 years plus of doing this work and from the social science literature is that there are a couple of relatively innocent reasons. In other words, it's not just that they're racist, or it's not just that they're wanting to preserve their position. That might be it. But it's also because, look, to be white in America, for the most part, with exceptions duly noted, but to be white generally is to never have to really have race be hyper relevant in your life. So you're working in an environment where you're not having to think about it much. You don't have a lot of black and brown supervisors. You're not being asked to think about your positionality relative to other people. And all of a sudden, in this era, what happens? You've got people saying, you know what, you should be thinking about this. Now, if I've never had to think about it, and now you ask me to think about it, and race becomes what social scientists call salient to you for the first time, it's going to be jarring. To black and brown folks, it's been salient since they came out their mama's womb, right? So it's always been an issue. But for white folks, it's like, what? You're asking me to learn calculus at 30. You know, you're asking me to learn a language I've never spoken. So I get it. That can be hard and it can be scary. The second thing is that to be white, according to the literature again and the research on this, is to really fundamentally believe that we live in a meritocracy, right? To believe that, you know, individual effort is all it takes and anybody can make it if they just try hard. Now, understand something. That is the secular gospel of the country. That is Genesis 1:1 in the Bible of Americanism. Anybody can make it if they try hard. Well, if I believe that and I never question it, I never interrogate how true that, it's a lovely statement, right? It's lovely to say that that's our goal. Yeah. But if you believe it's not a goal, it's our actual reality, then of course, what are you going to think? Well, you're going to think that whatever the current structure is in your company or your organization, whatever the hierarchy is, whoever does and does not work there, whoever lives or doesn't live in your neighborhood, you're going to assume it's natural. The people that run things because they're just better. And the people that aren't in those positions must be inferior because if they were equal or better than me, they'd already have these jobs. So, right? So if I believe in meritocracy as a thing, any effort to diversify the institution or make it more equitable strikes me by definition as discriminatory against me. By definition, it strikes me as you're lowering the quality. Well, of course, because you think that this thing you've already got is about merit. Because of course you do. Because white folks have had the luxury of believing that we got our jobs based on just our hard work, not the old boys networks, not connections, not somebody putting in a good word, not, you know, superior resources in K-12. So if I have been protected from thinking about race and questioning meritocracy, then anything that asks me to think about the injustice of the system strikes me as this bizarre kind of anti-white, you hate white people kind of thing, when that's not at all what's going on. But that's the context, I think, for why. And so what I try to explain to people is, listen, like at the most basic level, I mean, we could have a long philosophical conversation about why DEI is important, but at the most basic level, here's the deal. And I know those boys down on Broadway, those Nazis, are real upset about it, but it doesn't matter what they think because it's not going to change. This country is not going to be majority white for long. That's just a reality. I know they think they can make it so by deporting people, building walls. But here's the deal. The median age of white women in America, y'all, is 46. How many babies you think 46-year-old women are having? Not that many. So if I'm just saying, like, the age of white folks, like, that ship has sailed, y'all. The idea that we're going to reverse the demographic change in this country just by changing the immigration pattern, it's got nothing to do with immigration. We've had a net outflow of immigrants over the last 20 years, not influx, outflow, a net loss of people over the last 20 years in that 20-year period. So it's not about immigration, it's about birth rates, and white folks are just too damn old. So the median age for Latinas is 29. The median age for black women is 35. So your country is going to become more black and brown. You don't like it, then y'all the ones that need to move to Finland or wherever you want to go. Because the reality is this country is going to be multiracial. Whether it's going to be a democracy or not is up to us. But the idea that you're going to somehow stem no, so if you can't change it, if it's going to be black and brown, then your obligation, if you want to have a functional country, if you want Social Security to be there for you, you better have some workers who are paying into that system to keep it afloat. If you want the economy to function, you got to have workers. Who are those people going to be? The babies you're not making? No, they're going to be black and brown folks. So you better make sure that black and brown folk have opportunity, because if they don't have opportunity, you die. Literally, you die. So DEI or DIE, it's your choice. Like, you can do one or the other. But if you don't have DEI, the country's not going to survive.
And so, look, we got about 9 minutes for questions. So if you can keep it to one question and be pretty quick, and then I'm gonna ask you to do the same thing.
Absolutely,
Tim.
I'm sorry.
Be quick. Be a little bit quick, you know, because you're on the roll. You killing it, but you know what I'm saying. We want to make sure we can get all the questions.
But I just get carried away. I apologize. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, my name's Gary. I work at a nonprofit, and I'm gonna shorten my question. So how do I tell my white coworkers to take a back seat to the participants that we provide a service, and it's 99% black people.
Yeah.
How do I tell them to take a back seat and let the black people do the communicating and the hard, like being the liaison between, because it seems like they come from two different worlds.
They do, and I think the challenge, for me when I worked with nonprofits as a community organizer in New Orleans, working with groups that were really centered in the black community, what they did with us is they required us, and I appreciate them doing it, they required us to have undoing racism training. They required us to have these conversations before we could even work for the organization. I think that's a really valuable thing for all nonprofits to do. If you serve black and brown people, everybody in that group, including black and brown folks, not just the white folks, because black and brown folks can manifest white supremacy. Black and brown folks can manifest all of that internalized oppression.
Indoctrination.
Everybody needs to go through that kind of a discussion so they can have a grounding in understanding when to step up and when to step back. So I think you can say it yourself, but it's even more powerful if the organization imposes as a requirement, as a condition of employment, look, y'all, we got to go through this because these are the people that we serve. And if we're going to serve these folks, we got to be in community with these folks. And in order to do that, you have to be prepared to understand how sometimes, with the best of intentions, you manifest oppressive behaviors,
Thanks.
Yes, my name is Charles, and I wanted to ask, your parents sent you to this school when you were a very small child. So basically what looks like to be, they broke down the CRT training for you as a small child.
Yeah.
We know that the powers that be basically play the long game.
Yep.
So since they play the long game and they're projecting this out 20, 30 years,
Yep.
how do we offset that in the community so that what they're doing, what they're pushing through right now, we can counteract that?
Right, that's a great question. I mean, number one is always being prepared before they do what they're going to do. See, part of what I think caught us up a little short after George Floyd and after the uprising, we had 20 million people in the street in the course of about a year, 9 months to a year, and it was amazing. And I think a lot of us got carried away thinking, man, the moment has come. Well, I also know people that were activists in the 60s that thought 1968, the revolution was getting ready to happen. Well, here we are, 56 years later, and it didn't. And so we have to realize every time that there is progress, and Carol Anderson, brilliant scholar at Emory University, writes about this in her book, White Rage. She talks about how every move forward, particularly for black folks, and I think you could extend this to people of color more broadly, but every move for black folks has always been met with this pushback and backlash. If we had been prepared for that and not got carried away with the headiness of the moment, like, oh man, look, we're all in the street, it's gonna change. Well, yeah, some things did change, don't get me wrong. Systemically, we started talking differently. The language changed. All of a sudden, the language of systemic racism became mainstream. That is not nothing. So we should take a half a victory lap for moving the narrative, right? But the problem is the other side was like, yeah, I'll see your narrative, and I will raise you a ban on all CRT and a ban on DEI and a ban, and now we got rid of affirmative action, and we're going to keep taking away voting rights and making it harder to vote. So I just think we got to just know the history and understand that these things come in these cycles. If you know what's coming, you can prepare for it. But I think the problem was, I feel like in some ways we just thought like, oh, we got them now. Yeah. It's like, but do you know what country you live in? You got nothing yet, because these people haven't gone away. They just reorganized. The Confederates were defeated for a minute, but I swear to God, I'm not sure they lost that war. Yeah.
All right, so we got about 5 minutes left, so
Okay.
Tim.
I'm trying. That was shorter than my normal answer.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
I'm Carrie. This is my sister Carmen, so hopefully she
Hey,
can
how
answer
are
a
you?
question too. Okay. So it was really interesting what you were saying about Nashville and Memphis and kind of how they hate us. And I think back to, what was it, the 2020 election, where I credit Stacey Abrams for really kind of changing the tide in Georgia, and I would love to see that here. So what are your thoughts on the notion of countervailing power, and how can we as anti-racists leverage that to change public policy? So what you were talking about with DEI and voting rights and taking away affirmative action, how can we as like a group of people really tactically make an influence?
In 30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Because I want to get to everybody rest of the questions.
Lord, look, all I can say is we can follow Stacey Abrams' model a little bit here. It's not as easy because the demographics are not as favorable, perhaps, as they are in Georgia on the whole, and not as favorable here, let's say, as they are in Atlanta. But I think between Memphis and Nashville, and maybe even Chattanooga increasingly, we have enough sort of people that are committed to a different way of doing business in this state and a different way of doing politics, that if we start to demonstrate our collective commitment to that, and we start to have civic leaders and business leaders who stand up and demand a different politic and refuse to go along with these measures, then I think we have a long game. Going back to that issue of long game versus short game, the short game is it's going to be very hard when you got 5 senators in the Democratic Party or whatever it is, and we have this super majority or whatever else. But part of it too is electing different people. And part of it is saying if you're not happy with who's running the state right now, then we need to start running people for office. And we need to start running people for city council and school board. All these people on the right are taking over. This is what they did 25 years ago. They committed to taking over local and state government. And a lot of other people with a D in front of their name were just focused on getting the presidency. And I understand the value of the presidency, particularly right now, but I'm also going to tell you, if you let them take over the state and local government, the president doesn't mean anything. And Congress doesn't. So we have to start running people for office that are about something. And I think if we do that, we'll see some folks win that we might not expect to win. I know that's more than 30 seconds. Sorry, but done. Moving on. Go ahead.
Thank you, Tim.
I'm Carmen. So I've been working in tech for a while,
Yeah.
and in 2022, I'm sure as you know, there's been a huge influx of layoffs that have just happened all around the country.
Yeah.
There have been a lot of conversations around, is DEI dead? Google and Meta in 2023 have cut their diversity programs and their teams significantly. These teams that they put in place during George Floyd times to just kind of save face. But they're cutting these programs and cutting them by 90%.
Yeah.
And they're spending a lot of that money and forwarding it to AI now, which can't even identify Black and brown people, by the way.
Right.
So these huge companies are leading the march to for other companies to follow suit.
Yeah.
And this, impacts Nashville and our corporate businesses. So what can we do to counteract that?
I mean, I think we just have to challenge the ethos of tech.
30 seconds.
The ethos of tech, of all the industries out there, the tech folks are the ones who are most bought in to that notion of meritocracy. They just honestly believe there's a subjective way to rank 335 million Americans from 1 to 335 million. We have to be challenging that very underlying notion, because the reason they can get rid of DEI efforts is because they never believed in them anyway. Yeah. That was all PR for them. I mean, I did a talk at Google like 9-10 years ago. Google's a big company. I went to their campus. We had about 20 people in the room, and 17 of them were Black. So I mean, what does that tell you? Like, this was not a group of people. They didn't care about that. Their thing was, can you code? Right. Like, well, I mean, I don't know. Like I told you, I can even do calculus. I can't do chemistry. I can't do anything. I can run my mouth, but y'all clearly don't care about that because you didn't show up for my talk. So we have to challenge the underlying logic of tech, which is, technology can solve every problem. So they think AI can solve every problem. They think an algorithm can solve every problem. They think that if we have, artificial intelligence or we've got programs that can tell you who's going to reoffend in the criminal justice system. Well, all that stuff is based on the data that you fed it. So if you feed it biased data, it's junk in and it's junk out, right? But they just think, well, every solution has a technological problem, and we'll just tech our way out of it instead of actually acting like human beings and figuring out ethical solutions for the problems that we have. We're so bought into STEM that we're forgetting about what I call MESH, right? which is media literacy, ethics, sociology, and history. Yeah. We don't care about MESH education. We're focused on STEM. I know STEM is important, but so is media literacy, ethics, sociology, and history. If you don't know those things, then the science that you do know will misserve you. Right? The technology that you do use will destroy you. Even the math you won't understand. Like, if you don't understand the sociological context of that stuff, you'll become a victim of your own technological brilliance. And that's where we're at right now.
And
sorry.
Thanks to Tim, we're out of time. But I want to, if you all can just get straight to the question.
And I'll just nod.
Yeah.
I'll just say yes.
And then we can get straight to the question, yes. And then Tim
I promise.
If you can abbreviate a little bit.
I promise.
You're killing it. You're on fire.
Version.
But man.
I promise. Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Zaya. I promise I'll make this quick. So do you think that we make like this too much of a literal black and white issue? Because I mean, I've been to study abroad, and I went to England, and being black there is completely different from being black here.
Right.
So do you think that most of the issues here stem from a class problem, like coming from the top where there really is real racism and trickles down to the bottom, affecting the lower class communities? Like, you know, there's not just black and white. Like, white doesn't just mean you are a literal white person. Like, there's Germans, Italians, like, there's so many different types of people, and we kind of condense it into just this one mush, and then we kind of just like, oh, they're bad. We villainize everybody. So, you know, like, acknowledging that there's not just black and white people, but there are also other people who are affected by these issues. So, yeah, do we make it too much of a black and white issue?
She said she was going to be quick, Tim. She
All
lied.
right.
She lied.
I
She lied. But I need you to be quick.
I'll be quick. Look, there are a lot of different groups and a lot of different folks of color who experience racism and white supremacy in this country. But I think anti-blackness is the core of it. And I think we have to understand that anti-blackness is the core of what we've had as a system. And the whole history of the country is about taking all those other groups and playing them off against black people, including those white ethnics, Italians, Irish, Jewish folk, and actually saying, like, who you want to get down with, them or us? Because when the Irish came, they were told when they left Ireland, you are to join the abolitionist struggle because we were the slaves of the English. Right. And what did the Irish do when they got here? Well, some of them decided to join the abolition struggle, and some of them decided to burn the orphanage on 43rd Avenue in New York City because it was filled with black children, and they wanted to let you know they were not going to go to the Civil War to fight for the end of slavery. So every era has been about playing off all these different groups and making sure they knew you don't throw down with these people, meaning black people. So it's not just a white-black issue, but we have to understand the core of anti-blackness that's at the heart of the history of the country, for sure. Yeah.
Last one for the road, brother.
How you doing? Qasim Bagani, fellow Nashville native. I got a very straightforward question. Let's say we have 20 years to actually move the needle.
Yep.
Earlier you mentioned policy making may not be it.
Right.
Hell raising may be it.
Yep.
What's the one thing black folks can do to actually move the needle, and the one thing white folks can do to move the needle?
I think in some ways it's the same thing. I think it is about realizing that our children are the targets of those who want to end multiracial democracy as a possibility. And they will stop at nothing to propagandize our children, to turn our children against one another, to create a doubt that multiracial democracy is even possible. So our job, whether it's black folks or white folks or any folks, is to make sure that we are raising our children, that we are teaching our children what the schools ought to be teaching but cannot be trusted to teach, what the government ought to be saying but cannot be trusted to say, right? We have to do that. Our children are fundamentally ours to educate first and foremost. And so part of it is ensuring that they are immune, or at least as close to immune as possible, to the nonsense that is coming from people in positions of power. There's a lot of other things we can do, but I think that on a day-to-day basis, right, that is the thing. We can do that in our own homes. We can do that in our own churches and synagogues and mosques and institutions, and so that's the thing, is organizing where you are. We sometimes think big. It's like, well, we got to have a march or a demonstration or a sit-in. Those are great, but some of that stuff is performance. On a day-to-day basis, it isn't about being in the streets all the time. It's about what are you doing when the doors are closed and you're home and you know your kid is playing a video game or whatever they're doing. Like, that's cool. Diversions are fine, but it's also time to learn some stuff, right? It's also time to be like, hey, you know, I mean, the Panthers, one of the things the Black Panthers did that was so important was they did popular education. That, you know, you had folks in the neighborhood that would come in 2-3 times a week and learn about the history of the country. Like, and this was some of the poorest communities in places like Chicago. Fred Hampton would just gather, Mark Clark would just gather people, and they would just have popular education, learning about the stuff. The schools weren't doing it. In Mississippi, they set up freedom schools in Freedom Summer 1964 because they shut down in Mississippi schools for black kids. They didn't want black kids going to school with white kids. So they, like, after 8th grade, they would just shut down the high schools. And so you had organizers come in, set up freedom schools, teach black history, teach, you know, these things that otherwise were being missed. That's revolutionary stuff, right? Actually taking control and taking charge of our children's education in our own homes, I think, is one thing, and maybe the most important thing that we can do, because that's how we grow revolutionaries. And I don't mean revolutionaries in the bomb-throwing sense. I mean revolutionaries in the cultural sense, actually taking charge of the country and changing it into what it needs to be. I told you to be short, I lied.
You lied. Appreciate it, man. Thank you. Give it up for Tim Wise. God damn. Yeah, you need the water, man. You need the water. I just want to say, it's done. We're over. Y'all did an amazing job. Y'all was an amazing audience. I hope y'all enjoyed this show, this Q&A, and we definitely want to do more of this in the future because, you know, not only does the country need it, Nashville need it, Tennesseans need it. And in order to do that, you all need to support NPT, support your public media. We have a survey in the back, a QR code that I'm going to encourage you. I come from an organizer, so this is your action step, right? We never leave without giving some type of action step. So your action step is you got to scan that QR code in the back. You can do so while grabbing more pizza, but take that survey and let us know, you know, what more guests would you like to have? What other topics would you like us to talk about? What do we need to talk about? What do we need to tackle here in Middle Tennessee, and Nashville being the hub of Tennessee, and actually one of the hubs of the United States, as Tim mentioned, when it comes to social change. Like, we're one of those meccas, and we got to start wearing that with pride. And as a Nashvilleian myself, that's what I love to do and I love to explore. So scan that QR code. Support your local NPT PBS station, donate, become a member, all of those things, right? And you can do all that. It's QR codes to get all that information. So I'm challenging you. That's your action step. If you don't do it, you failed. It's over. You're not a good person. So thank y'all again. Can we just give it up one more time for Tim?
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
No,